Before I start my message, that's better. I'd like to throw some things out to you. First of all, last Wednesday when I came to church to prepare for prayer meeting, there was a message on the answer machine of a person that says, "My name is Chuck. I'm interested in attending church there. Please call me and let me know what the time of services are." It sounded like a weird message. And I have to be honest with you, I was a little bit concerned about responding to that particular message because I thought, well, there's some thing that's going to take place, things like that. But I did return the phone call. Found out that it was a fellow that was here during the time that the church here was being built. He lives up in northern Ohio right now, up around Dover and Canton and Coshocton in that particular area. And he is going to be taking a vacation in May. And was wanting to bring his wife down so she can see where he got his beginnings as far as Christianity is concerned. And I wonder how many of you were here during the time that this church was being built? Marilyn and Nancy, I think Nancy was, you weren't here? You came after? Okay. He told me his name was Chuck Lambert. Now I think Mike eventually got his position because he was being raised in a foster home right around the corner. And I was just wondering how many of you would happen to remember. Marilyn, I'm going to test your memory.
I don't know. What was the last name?
Lambert.
Oh, yes. There was a whole Lambert family. We used to take them back and forth. Yeah, there was several foster children. Yeah.
I know his uncle. His uncle was a member of the South Point Church when I preached down there, Don Lambert. So it's a very interesting, I had a long conversation with him. In fact, he robbed my time as far as my study time was concerned. That we didn't have prayer meeting anyway because only one person showed up besides me, and that was my son. And I can lecture to him at home. Second thing, I wonder how many of you remember when Jesus was asked what the greatest commandment was. And what was his answer? Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength. And then he said the second was like unto it. Love your neighbors yourself. There are three areas of love there. I don't know if you ever realize it now, but the love of God, the love of neighbor, and love of self. Love your neighbor as yourself. If a person doesn't love himself, they cannot love their neighbor, as God told us to do. This was a sermon that I had planned in my planning to preach last Sunday morning. Our love for God. And the reason why I'm preaching it a week later is because we have canceled a few services because of the weather. And so I'm a little bit behind. And so I apologize for that. But I can remember when I was in college, we had a professor that was pretty much like I am. He loved to tell jokes. Every once in a while, if you didn't listen in class, you would miss out on the joke that he would tell. His name was Andy Dale. And I believe that Andy Dale wrote a poem that emphasized the things that I'm going to emphasize this morning. But this particular poem that I was introduced to back in that particular time, I can't remember the rhyming of it, or the metric of it, or any of the other things about it, but I do remember some of the things that were being said. A young man fell in love with a girl, which happens. And he was writing to this particular girl, telling of his undying love for her. And in this particular letter that he was writing to this young lady that was the object of his affection, he said, I climbed the highest mountain for you. I would swim the deepest ocean. I would fight the largest army. And he kept going on and on and on about what he would do for her. And then when he signed the letter, he said, I pledge my undying eternal love to you. And then they put a P.S. on it. I'll be over tonight if it doesn't rain. Ladies, is there a message there that you can relate to? I'm not going to say more than that. But I want you to think just for a moment, how many Christians do you know, people that profess to be a Christian, who actually have gone pretty much the way of the world? How many people do you know all that say, I love the Lord, I'll do anything for Him, but don't ask me to sing in the car. I love the Lord, I'll do anything for Him, but don't ask me to teach a Sunday school class. I love the Lord, I'll do anything for Him, but don't ask me to pray in public. And I'm not trying to pick on any particular person or anything else. I'm just going by years of experience that I've had in the ministry. And I can remember a young lady who was a member of the West Corbin Church of Christ, where I preached for about 8 years. In the 8 years that I was there, I think she was only in church one time. My memory serves me right. My memory is starting to fail me. But she was in the hospital. And her husband called me, and he was just as delinquent as she was, and asked me if I would call her. And I did. And I remember talking to Ruth, and that was her name. And as we were talking, I tried to emphasize a need in her life because she was being diagnosed with terminal cancer. For her to get right with God. And I can remember what she said at that particular time. She says, Preacher, God and I are just like that. And she crossed her fingers. I hope and pray she was right. And I'm not being critical of her. But her lifestyle spoke just the opposite of what her words did. How much do we love God? How much are we willing to do for God in our life? Does our life speak out of the eternal love that we have for God? This past week, Ruth asked me to mail some papers for her certification, which has to be done every year. She has to prove that she's had classes of advanced training or continuing training. And this, she wanted to have a receipt of the papers she was sending in to the Kentucky Board of Certification. I went down to mail this letter. If I didn't realize it was as important as it was, I think I would have left, because that post office in Proctorville was lined up was just wow. I spent an hour and a half in the line. I don't know how many people came in, stood in line for a little while, went out again. But while I was there, I got telling jokes. Clyde would like that. And I kept shooting back and forth some of the jokes that I made up and everything else, and we were having a good time. And one of the women that I was standing in line with looked at me and said, You know who you put me in mind of? And my quick response has always been, I hope I put you in mind of Jesus. She says, You know, I was just about ready to say that. And that made me proud. Not because I reminded her of Jesus, but because that's what I want to do in life. When people look at your life, the testimony that you give, do they see your relationship to Jesus? And thus your relationship to God. When Jesus was in his last week of ministry, there was a time where they began asking questions. And the Bible tells us that they were asking questions just for the purpose of trying to trick Jesus and finding fault in him. And after he answered several of the questions, one person stood up and says, Hey, what is the greatest commandment? And that's when Jesus gave the answer that he did. with all our heart, with all our strength, with all our mind, with everything we are to love Jesus. Unfortunately, very few of us do that all the time. I know I don't. And I'd like for us to think just for a few moments about what it means in our life. What direction do we go to as a result of our loving God and His Son, Jesus Christ? Very first thing I want to say is the idea that this love that we're talking about is not a phileo type of love. The Greek word phileo means brotherly love. Like I love my brother, I love my kids, I love my wife. This type of love. The type of love that's been expressed here is the agape type of love, which is a high moral, divine, spiritual type of love, a inward soulmate type of connection.